Welcome to this session, ladies and gentlemen. And before we kick off, we acknowledge the Wiradjuri people of the Kuri Nation, traditional custodians of the land in which this event is taking place, and pay respect to their elders past and present. Tonight's session is entitled well, I was going to say that, but it's actually Asparagus Syndrome this evening. Which automatically takes us really to Kathy Lette. Kathy Lette is an Australian author, best known for her novel Puberty Blues, although she's probably tired of hearing this. She's written 12 international bestsellers, including To Love, Honour and Betray, and The Boy Who Fell to Earth. Her novels have been published in 14 languages. She's an ambassador for Women and Children First, Plan International and the White Ribbon Alliance. In 2010, she received an honorary doctorate from Southampton Solent University. Kathy has been a singer with the Salami Sisters, and I do remember them very well, a newspaper columnist in Sydney and New York, and a television sitcom writer for Columbia Pictures in Los Angeles. She's famous for her comic novels that speak directly to women. She first achieved success as a teenager with the novel, the aforementioned Puberty Blues, 1979, which was made into a major film, directed from memory by Bruce Beresford. Her internationally best-selling novels also include Girls' Night Out in 1998, Nip and Tuck, 2001, and How to Kill Your Husband and Other Handy Household Hints in 2006. Her latest novel, The Boy Who Fell to Earth, brings far more than just her trademark humour and wit, drawing on her personal experiences with autism. It is heartbreaking and humble, heartwarming and hilarious. Could you please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, the extraordinary Kathy Lette.
Who wrote that? Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming along today. Yes, I am going to talk today about autism and what it's like, raising a child on the spectrum. But just to put things in context, I thought I'd just talk a little bit about myself first. Basically, I only write because it's cheaper than therapy. And as John said, I did write my first book when I was 17, and Puberty Blues, so I'm sure you know about it. The series is on at the moment. And, that book, well, the boys I grew up with in Sydney disproved the theory of evolution. They were evolving into apes. And just as I always tell this story, but it's a perfect example of how sexist they were. They used to get us to cut their names out in paper, sticky tape them to our stomachs, and then sunbake so we get a tan tattoo in the shape of their names. So if ever I get cancer, I'll have a melanoma called Bruce. And they were incredibly sexist. They thought the sex drive meant doing it in the car. And I bet there's a lot of women in this room who have the imprint of a steering wheel on their backs, But I've worked out why men are like that, why they think sex drive means doing it in the car. That little sign on the rear vision mirror that says, "Objects in this mirror may appear larger than they are." It all makes sense then, doesn't it? But after the success of that book, I realised that I could just cannibalise my own life to make a living. So really, I've written about everything that has ever happened to me. I've written about living in Sydney as a single girl, trying to find a man who wasn't married or gay, or married and gay, which is usually the case, or just some guy who didn't think monogamy was something you make dining room tables out of. I've written about ageing from the time I was living in LA. I mean, has anyone been to LA? You must have all been there at some stage. It's the strangest place. There is no law of gravity in Los Angeles. Skin sags upwards. It's incredible. And all they're doing with cosmetic surgery is dragging everything up. So the ankle becomes the knee becomes the navel, the clitoris becomes the chin. And that's how you spot a recipient of cosmetic surgeries, to look for a woman who's rubbing that part of anatomy a little bit too vigorously. You see a lot of that there. And just, while I'm talking about aging, I'm writing now too about I'm at that age where my women friends are being dumped by their husbands for younger models, and the things they do to themselves to try and stay young. I call it not racial, but facial prejudice. Women get judged on our looks in a way that men don't. I mean, for women, wordplay is foreplay. I mean, how else is Woody Allen still getting laid? But, you know, my girlfriends will get dumped and then I won't see them for a while, and then I'll suddenly see these breasts coming down the street, you know. They've got their own postcode. They're arriving about 5 minutes before she does. And the lips, too. The lips are coming at me like that. You know that look where they've almost look like they've got a vagina sutured to their face? And you know what they do? That's silicone. They're basically taking the fat out of their bottoms and injecting it into their lips, so they're literally talking out of their arse. It explains everything about Hollywood, right? I've written about childbirth, you know, because it is Stone Age what happens to us, isn't it, girls? It's prehistoric. I mean, lying on that birthing table, adoption starts to look like a very attractive alternative. And if ever you're in any doubt about the gender of God, you then know that he is a bloke. And yet, you know, of course, the men are no help. My husband kept telling me he didn't want to be there at the birth, and I kept saying to him, I don't want to be there at the birth. If you were there when it went in, you'll be there when it comes out. But of course, being a man, he completely took over. I remember I wrote about all this in Fetal Attraction, where the little guru's sitting at the front of them saying, and who's having a natural childbirth? And all the men put their hands up. I mean, hello? Most men would need an epidural for, you know, an ingrown toenail. I think hypochondria is actually Greek for man. And any man who says he's not a hypochondriac, that's the only disease he doesn't have, in my view. So I've written a lot about that. I've written a lot about motherhood because, you know, childbirth is a doddle compared to what comes next. Cracked nipples, constipation, mountains of hemorrhoids. I mean, Edmund Hillary couldn't scale those bastards. But no matter how bad it gets, as a mum, of course, you can't escape because you're tethered by the tit. You're a 24-hour catering service. You are Meals on Heels. I've written about the sleep deprivation you have as a mother. I've written about the sex deprivation, because kids are a contraceptive. Every time you go to have sex, the baby wakes up or the toddler toddles in. Although a woman in Manchester did give me a fantastic sex tip for new parents. Vaseline on the doorknobs. It sounds painful, but they can't get in. Isn't that brilliant? But, I mean, really, if we're honest, does any woman want to have sex after she's had a baby? I don't think so. I think a new mother's favourite position is the doggy position, where he begs and you just roll over and play dead. So I've written a lot about marriage because I think, you know, love prepares you for marriage the way needlepoint prepares you for round-the-world solo yachting. And we had a session this morning where we were talking about the fact that, you know, my generation thought we were going to have it all, but we actually ended up doing it all. And even though women make up 50% of the workforce, I would say, what do we think, girls? We're doing about 99% of all the housework and all the childcare still. And I do all my research in a very scientific fashion over cappuccinos with girlfriends. And what I discovered is that my generation are having much less sex than our sort of repressed sisters from the 1950s. And I'm thinking, well, why is that? And it's basically that we're just exhausted. I mean, when you've worked all day and then you come home at night and defrost the chops and put the washing on and do the ironing and help with the homework and find the lost sports kit and, you know, find the square root of the hypotenuse, because that's lost as well, apparently, you know, and put the cat out and everything else. By the time you get into bed, the one thing you're fantasizing about is sleep, and then you get the hand, and you think, oh, no, not the hand. You know, men make horror movies called The Blob and The Thing. Women would make the hand. And I think, here's this guy, he hasn't talked to you all day, you know, hasn't helped you around the house, and he thinks you're in the mood for love, and you're in the mood for running him through with a carving knife. But I have got a really good sex tip. I was telling the girls this morning, if you want to get out of sex with your husband, just when you feel the prod of his penis in your back, you tell him the tax department rang and want to audit his accounts, because not only does he lose the urge for sex, but he won't be able to sleep either, so no snoring, results. So, and it's particularly hard for me, I mean, because I'm married to a human rights lawyer, Jeffrey Robertson. I don't know if you've heard of him, but when I first lived with him and we had a baby, the difficult thing when you're married to a human rights lawyer is you can never get the high moral ground. Because when I would say to him, oh, could you come in here and change this nappy? He'd say, oh, I'd like to, but I have 350 people on death row in Trinidad. You know, what could I say? Although after a year I started saying, oh, let them die. After the second baby, I was like, I'm going to go there and kill them myself. Human rights begin at home. And you know who he was going out with when I met him? A little bit of hot goss for you. Nigella Lawson. Oh, yeah. He dumped her for me. Yeah. And I can't cook. Nothing. I use my smoke alarm as a timer. Yeah. So I've written a lot about marriage. I've written a lot about having a teenage daughter. I mean, how many of you have got teenage daughters in the audience? A lot, yeah. It's like living with the Taliban, isn't it? You're not allowed to laugh, sing, dance, wear short skirts. When I go out, just say I'm wearing a dress like this, a little mini, I have to sneak down the door like that. I get to the door, I go, "Arr!" If she hears me, she runs after me, she says, "What are you wearing? Go back to your room, you're not going out dressed like that." I think teenage daughters are God's punishment for having sex in the first place. But I have got a very good survival tip for any mums out there with a teenage daughter. Next time your teenage daughter is hitting you and kicking you and saying, "I wish you'd just die," just take a big drag on a cigarette, a big gulp of wine and say, "I'm doing my best, darling." I've written a lot about, everything. And that right now I'm writing about menopause because I'm having my own weather. I think all the things women have been through in our lives, starting with period cramps and then pregnancy and then childbirth where you stretch your vagina the customary, 5 kilometres, then mastitis and then the menopause, and then just when everything goes quiet, do you know what happens? You grow a beard. How can that be fair? Right now I've got like a macrame hanging basket arrangement. I'm going to get a grant from the Australia Council, I think, do something. The reason I'm telling you all of this is to explain to you that I am a very candid person. I have written about everything that's ever happened to me, but there was one thing I never, ever talked about, and that's the fact that I have a son on the autistic spectrum. I think, first of all, I didn't want to invade his privacy, but also it just felt too raw. But last year, I started writing my 12th novel, I think it was, and I was writing a comedy about the sex war, but this other book started pouring out at the end of my pen, and it was about a single mother raising a child with autism. And I thought, oh gosh, I didn't want to write it. I tried to stop, but I couldn't stop. It was so cathartic for me. So then I thought, well, I'll publish the book, and I just won't tell people about my own personal history with the story. But then a journalist got hold of it, and got hold of the fact that there was some truth to it, and asked me if I had a son with autism. And well, I wasn't going to lie. If I lie, it looks as though I'm embarrassed of him. And of course, the opposite is true. I'm so proud of him. So I asked him what he thought we should do, and whether we should come out in public about this. He was 21 at the time. And he read the book, and he loves it. I mean, he thinks, in his words, he says it's a celebration of idiosyncrasies, eccentricities, and being different. So with his blessing, I very tentatively started talking about what it's like having a child on the spectrum. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the people here on the same planet as me, the autism planet, but for anyone here who doesn't know what autism is, it's a lifelong neurological condition, chiefly characterised by an inability to socialise and communicate, often chronic OCD and anxiety attacks. I mean, if you've got autism, all day, every day, you're sort of out of sync. You don't get a joke, you laugh in the wrong place, you get into trouble for saying the wrong thing, you don't understand why you're in trouble. I mean, it's just constantly feeling that you don't belong. But also often it's coupled with a very high IQ. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this if you have children on the spectrum. When our son was born, we just thought he was a genius. He walked early, talked early, he was so bright. And then at about 14 months, he just lost his language. It was almost like a computer crashing, And it was terrifying. So by the time we got a diagnosis, he was 3 years old. And I remember sitting in this very awful kind of Victorian hospital in London where the doctors said, that Jules had autism. And that was like a cold knife just going into my heart. I mean, that's a diagnosis that drags you down into the dark. And my overwhelming emotion was like a lioness-type love. My claws just came out, my protectiveness, and I still feel like that about him, and I always will feel that overprotectiveness. But also, I thought suddenly my son had been turned into a plant, a wilting plant in a dark room, and I just wanted to drag him into the light. So, of course, you go through many stages. This is distracting, this photo thing, isn't it? I'm going to put that up there. You go through many stages, and I'm sure if you have children on the spectrum, you can relate to this. The first stage I went through was complete denial. I mean, I bankrupted myself, seeing every medical expert in the country. I mean, I did everything from cranial massage to karma maintenance. I mean, my son had so many tests, he must have thought he was being drafted into some elite, astronaut moon mission or something. I hate to think how many doctors' children I've now put through university, actually. And then, of course, as a mother, your next response is guilt. I mean, my guilt gland throbbed so terribly. I kept thinking, was it something I ate? Was it something I drank? Was it that one glass of wine in the final trimester? If only I'd feng shuied my aura like Gwyneth Paltrow in Organic Co. And then the next phase I went through was a real attack of the why me's. I just felt so angry. And I went into martyr mode for a little while. That wasn't attractive. But then, finally, you just accept that this is the unique little person you have, and you just have to do your best by them. I mean, not that it's easy. I think raising a child on the spectrum, it's almost like trying to put together a giant jigsaw puzzle without the benefit of the coloured picture on the box. I sometimes think I didn't give birth to Julius, but I found him under a spaceship, and I'm kind of raising him as my own. There is no owner's manual. And they have a sort of literal, lateral, tangential logic, which is really fascinating, though. And when Jules got his language back, he was about 4 when he started, after a lot of speech therapy, he started talking, and he's never shut up since then. But while experts were telling me my son was retarded, I found him so fascinating. I remember I was in the kitchen, I was chopping up onions, and Jules came in one day and he was watching me, and he's 4 years old, and he said, "Mum, if onions make you cry, are there vegetables that make you happy?" I thought, great question. And then the next day he came in and he said, "Mum, what's the speed of dark?" And I'm thinking, again, great question, no answer, but he was always saying these things to me. Was the vacuum cleaner a broom with a stomach? And was a piano, was a harp just a nude piano? I mean, he was always coming out with this stuff. So, but, despite this disarming charm they have, it is very, very difficult. I mean, the hardest thing for me, and I'm sure when we talk later, you'll have your own stories, is the sense of social isolation. Because when he was a little boy and I'd take him to the park, I used to call the sandbox the quick sandbox. Because as soon as he did anything even vaguely erratic or out of the ordinary, other parents would glare at me as though I was a bad mother. Or they'd pull their child away as though Julius had some kind of contagious leprosy or something. And I mean, that just used to break my heart. And then the other time I found really hard was when he was a teenager. And all my friends' kids, were going on their gap year and they were going down the Amazon or up Everest, or they were doing work experience at top barristers' chambers or at Vogue magazine. And it was almost like being at an incredible banquet where you can smell the aroma wafting out. And you're outside absolutely starving, with your nose pressed up against the glass. And that I found really hard. Of course, the next terrible thing that parents have to face if they've got a child on the spectrum is schooling. And I'm sure you can all commiserate with this. I mean, every expert agrees on one point, that only in a small classroom with specialist teaching protected from bullying can a child on the spectrum ever reach his or her potential. And, doctors, nurses, teachers, therapists, social workers, educational psychologists, they all agree that this is the case. But getting the necessary help proves to be a postcode lottery. I mean, it really does. And the waiting lists for special needs schools are so long, there's kind of Stone Age families at the front. The system, I think, is designed with bureaucratic speed bumps to slow down a parent's progress because, of course, it's expensive to have intervention. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I filled in forests of forms. I saw squadrons of psychologists. The technical term for this process is called being passed from pillar to post, of course. And I do know families who really did bankrupt themselves fighting councils to get a placement for their child in a special school. I mean, my own son, Jules, he was mainstreamed in a state school. But I really do think, I mean, it was woefully inadequate. I think putting a child with special needs into a mainstream school is as pointless as giving a fish a bath. I mean, most kids at school are striving to learn math and grammar. My son was striving to make himself invisible. I mean, it was just so painful. And, although by 8, Jules had this encyclopedic knowledge of tennis and the Beatles and Buddy Holly and Shakespeare, knew all of Hamlet off by heart, hello, the only subject at which he excelled in school was phoning in sick. And he was, being told off for laziness or chastised for disruptive behaviour, put on detention for failing to understand homework, constantly belittled by peers. means that mainstream school becomes little more than a masterclass in low self-esteem. I mean, the overworked teachers treated my son as though he was a feral creature, recently netted in the Amazon and still adjusting to captivity. And the worst thing was that the pupils taunted and teased him so badly. And bullying makes school unbearable for kids with special needs. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted, you know this already. But 60% of children with autism report serious bullying in schools, as opposed to 11% of neurotypical kids. So I remember the worst day when he was 9 and he came home with a sticker on his back saying, "Kick me, I'm a retard." And he's crying and saying to me, "Mum, the kids called me a retard. Am I a retard? What is a retard?" I mean, you might as well have just ripped my heart out of my chest and thrown it on the floor. It still makes me upset to think about it. But I mustn't cry over that. I think, you know, protecting a child with special needs is like trying to stop the ice melting in the desert. It is just so, so hard. But, you know, we had meetings and we all promises of better security and that kind of thing. But I think trying to stand up on your own, fighting your child's corner, it's like trying to stand up to Voldemort with a butter knife. It is just so hard and it's so exhausting. I'm sorry I get upset, but, you know, I'm sure you all do with your own kids. He's fine now, I don't know why I'm crying over that. But isn't it true, though, how you envy the normal worries of everyday mothers? You know, the ones who fret over sugar content in cereal and how to make broccoli interesting and why their offspring wouldn't eat anything which hadn't danced on an ad in television. You know, the parent of a special needs child has to be their legal advocate, fighting his or her educational corner, full-time scientists keeping up with the latest developments. You've got to challenge doctors, question medications, you've got to be his executive officer, making difficult decisions on their behalf, and also full-time bodyguard against bullies. And in my case, I mean, high school didn't improve things. Julius used to call his school Guantanamo Bay. And it would take me an hour to haul him out of bed, and only then with a mixture of cajoling, begging and blackmailing. And I used to, by screaming till the paint peeled off the walls, I could usually half stuff him into his uniform. But then, you know, only after he'd trash his entire room in the process. And my brilliant mothering skills became strikingly apparent when I would then run back to my room and sob into my pillow in the fetal position. Eventually, I would summon up the strength to drag him as he cursed and cussed to the school gates before dashing to work, all distraught and dishevelled and pan-dried from mascara leakage. The daily ordeal left me more depleted than Our Lady of Put Upon and exhausted, the patron saint of parents of children with special needs. But Julius's anxiety was understandable. I mean, leaving home when you have special needs can be as hazardous as sort of Scott leaving his Arctic base camp. And the hard thing, I think, for parents like us is not to mollycoddle them too much. I mean, I never let him leave the house without enough instructions in his pocket, you know, longer than War and Peace, and enough sort of stuff in his backpack to set up a wilderness homestead somewhere. And I'm so overprotective that my friends and family always say they can't believe I let him out, you know, out of my womb, that is. And even now, whenever he walks out the door, you'd think he was emigrating. You know, the fuss, the worry, the long hugs and heartfelt goodbyes. But the thing is, how will you ever know if he can cope in the outside world if you don't let him out into it? So you just have to. But still, you know, on a serious, serious side, when you think about all the horrific fates that have befallen other young, especially men with Asperger's, the tragic death of Stephen Simpson, who had his genitals set on fire on his 18th birthday in London because he was gay and just picked on. And another big case in England, an autistic boy who was forcibly imprisoned and shackled by the police because he jumped into a swimming pool fully clothed. You know, and he couldn't explain to them why he was being rude to them. You know, it's no wonder that we worry so. And after my son was mugged when he was 14 at knife point, I remember then I read the next day in the paper a police officer saying people with special needs are routinely targeted. I'm afraid it's the price of disability. And I thought, if this is the price of disability, being differently abled, you know, then the price is way too high. The only way to educate, you know, to eradicate bullying is to encourage society to be more accepting of our children's difference and their unique abilities. Because, you know, my son is unique, as yours are. They're so interesting and unusual. And despite all the angst and exhaustion he's given me, he has also brought me great joy and humour and compassion into my life. I mean, without doubt, he is one of the most interesting people I've ever met, besides John, of course. He keeps me on my mental toes all the time by constantly asking me the most tangential questions still. I mean, the other day he said to me, the American Constitution says you must pursue happiness, but how do you know when you've caught it? I mean, I can't answer these questions, but they're interesting. And he said to me, why is there no other word for synonym? Great question. And then when I was getting drunk with the girls the other night, he said to me, if there's a happy hour in bars, is there a sad hour too? And I thought, that's bloody profound. So I think the thing to remember, and what I always think experts leave out when they're talking to us about autism and what we deal with, is that it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, a lot of it can be quite funny, because for anyone here who doesn't have a child on the spectrum, they're very candid. I mean, they say whatever they're thinking. They just don't have a filter, that filter that we have. So I can just give you some funny examples from my own life, and I'm sure you'll share some with me later. But, you know, socially, it can be very tricky. When I'm out with Jules, I find myself sort of sweating more than Paris Hilton doing a Sudoku, you know, or George Bush playing Scrabble, because I never know what he's going to say. I mean, just some examples I'll give you that make me laugh. When he was about 12, I took him to Downing Street to a charity event, and he met Tony Blair. And I said, oh, Jules, this is the Prime Minister, Tony Blair. And he just looked at him and said, oh, yes, you're the one my mother calls Tony blah, blah, blah. And I'm just standing there going, ha, 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 ha. You know, normally I'm not at a loss for words, but I couldn't think of anything to say. And then I took him to some other charity event, and there's this really horrible old hatchet-faced harridan in British politics called Anne Widdecombe. Have you ever heard of her? She's absolutely terrifying. And I took Jules to some other charity event when he was about 12, I guess, and he met Anne Widdecombe. And I said, oh, Jules, this is Anne Widdecombe. And he said, oh, yes, you're the one my mother says is two-faced. But if so, why are you wearing that one when it's all wrinkly and crinkly and old? Once again, couldn't think of a thing to say. And then, I don't want to go for gold in the name-dropping Olympics, but this is a funny story, I think. And when Jules was about 13, I had Hugh Jackman over for dinner. I mean, every girl's wet dream, right? And I am flirting for Australia. I mean, in my mind, we've already eloped and we're living in the Caribbean. We're getting on so well. And then Jules came home, and I jumped up and hugged him and said, oh, hi, darling, you're home. I said, oh, look, sweetheart, you're growing a moustache. And he just scrutinised my face and he said, so are you, Mum. Look at all those hairs on your top lip, and there's quite a few on your chin as well. And I'm thinking, is it too late to put him in the condom vending machine for the refund? So, but, you know, that candid, while that's quite funny, that it can be quite dangerous too, because another time I remember when he was about 14 or something, we were walking along Finchley Road in London, and it was really dark, and this big hairy biker came towards us, and he was really quite scary. Tats, you know, everything, and a Rottweiler, and I thought, oh, we'll just scurry past quietly. Well, Julia stopped him, pulled on his leather jacket at elbow, and said to him, excuse me, sir, but has anyone ever told you that your chin looks like upside-down testicles? And I'm like, who is this child, and why is he calling me mother, you know? And then another example of how that literal logic can be dangerous. My daughter and I were going out one day when Jules was about 15, and I said, if you go out, can you lock the windows and lock the door, because I don't want burglars stealing my jewellery. So Georgie and I got home a couple of hours later, doors open, windows open, and when he got home I said, Jules, why didn't you lock the door? I told you I was worried about burglars stealing my jewellery. And he just looked at me and he said, why would men want jewellery? Okay. There's a logic there. It's you know, insane, but so, you know, that's the downside. That's what we have to watch out for them. You know, because they can find themselves in trouble. But you can see from those examples why a child with autism feels out of sync all day, every day. But the trouble is when they're constantly told off and put down and made to feel they're wrong all the time and inadequate, their self-esteem can sink down lower than, you know, Lady Gaga's bikini line, which is quite low. So I think it's really important with our own children that we keep telling them all the unique and wonderful things about them too, and try and build up their self-esteem. I mean, my own son is like Wikipedia with a pulse. I don't even have a diary. I just say to him, where was I in March 2006 on the 3rd or something? And he'll just go, and he'll remember exactly where I was, what I was wearing, and probably what I was talking about. And yet, you know, even though people with autism can often have this very high IQ, only 15% of them are in the workforce, which is much lower than any other disability area. And the problem is, of course, that they say what they're thinking. And I often imagine the job interview where the boss is like, well, what's your worst quality? My honesty. I don't think honesty is a bad quality. I don't give a stuff what you think. That could be a typical sort of job interview with somebody who's got Asperger's or autism. But not employing these kids, ones with Asperger's anyway, is such a waste for our community, because we now know with diagnostic hindsight that, Einstein and Mozart and Van Gogh and Orwell and Warhol and all these fascinating people, scientists, musicians, were all on the autistic spectrum. So with the right help, our kids could give back to society in the most interesting way. But of course, with the cutbacks and the scramble for funds, kids with less obvious disability, they don't have a wheelchair or a white stick or whatever, or a guide dog, are the ones who are going to lose out. And they could just end up living in a bedsit on benefits, which is such a tragedy for them, but also a tragedy for us. So, this book I've written, The Boy Who Fell to Earth, I was so nervous about coming out about my own private experiences, but I must say it's taught me a great lesson, that it's always better to talk about things and to shine a light into a dark corner. And if we can take away the stigma from autism and Asperger's in any way, then it can only make the world a better place. And I know I've done the right thing too, because I get letters every day from other mothers, mainly mothers, some dads, thanking me for putting into words what their lives are like, only because it's so good to know you're not alone, don't you think? If you just know you're not the only one going through these things, it's better you can manage it better. But also, they can use it as a psychological shorthand to say to people, don't judge me, read this is what my life is like. The other thing I was going to say was, yes, is that I also think there's a lot of undiagnosed autism out there. If you think about husbands in particular, the ones, who are the train spotters and the plane spotters, who put their musical collections in alphabetical order. Even when I think about my own darling dad who died last year, he was an engineer and he worked in optic fibre. His name was Merv. We called him Optic Merv. And I remember, he was sort of emotional bonsai. You had to whack the fertiliser on to get any feelings out of him. But I remember once my mum and dad had this terrible fight, and my mum was really upset with him, and she was turning her back to him in bed, and she was serving his meals in silence. And I've got 3 sisters, and we were so stressed, and we were all tiptoeing around the house. We were walking on eggshells. We were all so upset. By the end of the week, my mum couldn't bear it anymore, and she said, "Oh, Murphy, it's just too awful. Let's just make up." He just went, "What?" He hadn't noticed. Nothing. Nothing. And you see, I don't think that's so unusual if you think about your own husbands. But I was going to say too that a lot of scientists I've been talking to lately, they keep telling me that they think they might be able to kind of cure autism within the next 50 years by changing the neurological pathways and the electrical wiring in the brain and giving oxytocin sprays and things like that. But then I think to myself, if we cure autism, will we lose all of those amazing virtuosic musicians and quirky artists and scientists and whatever? Because it definitely is true that people with autism are the garlic in life's salad. And without them, how bland the world would be, a case of the bland leading the bland. But not that I'm saying that it's easy. And I think, a lot of parents would say, yes, I would cure it if I could. And my son often says to me too that he feels like he's drowning in his own brainwaves. So I'm hoping that this little book I've written can act as a small literary life raft for him, for people on the spectrum, but also for parents, to sort of give them a bit of comedic comfort, along the way. So John and the others are going to come up in a minute. We're going to open the discussion out. But I just want to say to you to thank you so much for coming, and also to say how great it is to be home. Because I've been living in London now for like 23 years. And when I first got there, the English was so awful to me, although it took me a while to realise they were being awful because they speak euphemism. They used to say to me, "Oh, you Australians are so refreshing." And I think, oh, they really like me. But no, what that really means is rack off, you loudmouth colonial nymphomaniac. And I think, how dare they call me a loudmouth, please? But I think finally, after 23 years, they've kind of finally accepted me, because I went to the Royal Polo. A friend took me to the Royal Polo last year, and Clarence House rang me up and said, "We can see you're coming to the polo. Would you like to present the cups to the princes?" So I thought, 8 sweaty men in jodhpurs, what's not to love? So I was standing there and I was about to present the cups, and I said to the organiser, well, what do I do? And he said, well, you just present the cups to the princes and kiss them on the cheek. So I could see what's the first one called? William, yeah. I could see Wills walking towards me, and he looked so bored. So I thought I might as well have some fun. So I said, apparently I have to kiss you. Do you want tongue? And Prince William went, oh, perhaps later. And then he went back and told the others, and I could see them killing themselves laughing. So then Prince Harry came up and I said, do you want tongue? And he goes, oh, yeah! And he picked me up and pashed me, and I rode him around the paddock and things. And, and I thought, that guy's still single. And I felt a certain frisson. So if I play my cards right, I could be the future, one of the future members of the royal family. And then I'll get to be on a postage stamp and get licked all day. Now that's what I call job satisfaction. Anyway, so on that strange note, would John and the others want to come up and...
I think the other end, Kathy, for you. I think there is an order. And so to our panel. To begin with, Judy Brewer. Judy Brewer is a well-known autism spectrum disorder parent advocate. Judy was the founder and initial convener of Autism Asperger Advocacy Australia, a board member of Oaks and Wild Oats, a director of the Australian Autism Council and co-patron and life member of Autism Spectrum Australia. In addition, Judy has been involved in many government disability committees, including as chair of National Family Carers Voice, member of the Carer Allowance Review Panel, the Special Disability Trust and the Autism State Planning Advisory Board. Could you welcome Judy Brewer? John Giardini is a child psychiatrist at the Women and Children's Hospital Adelaide and a professor in the disciplines of psychiatry and paediatrics at the University of Adelaide. Professor Giardini is a spokesman for Healthy Skepticism, an organisation devoted to countering misleading drug promotion. His interests include quality use of medicines, suicide prevention, medical education and dealing with child abuse. Could you welcome Professor Giardini? Dorothy Scott, OAM, was the Foundation Chair of Child Protection and the inaugural Director of the Australian Centre for Child Protection at the University of South Australia until her retirement in 2010. During her time as Senior Social Worker, Emeritus Professor Scott helped establish specialist services for women experiencing postpartum psychiatric disorders and services for women and children who had been sexually assaulted. Since the 1980s, she has conducted numerous reviews and inquiries in Australia in the field of child protection and served on ministerial advisory bodies in several states and territories. Could you please welcome Dorothy Scott? We will be throwing the panel, the whole thing open to Q&A when people do have one or two questions. And you could tweet us by going to hashtag UOMFOI if you want to tweet. And Rashida is here who will be able to accept the tweets and pass them on to us to further fuel our discussion. John, I'm going to throw you right in the deep end here. Being a skeptic, does autism exist?
Well, there's no doubt that the suffering and distress and dysfunction exists. How useful it is to bring it all together under the umbrella of one categorical label,
yes,
I'd remain sceptical about that.
Okay.
There are obviously advantages in terms of access to services and resources.
Yes.
There are disadvantages in terms of oversimplification and perhaps not exploring carefully enough what else might be contributing to a person's state of well-being.
Okay. Judy, I'm going to bring you in on this because, I mean, this is silliness, isn't it, what he's going on with here? Because, I mean, if someone has, if someone can't see terribly well, we know that they have various degrees of blindness. Now, you'd call it blindness of sorts, and especially people who have no sight whatsoever are totally blind. Now, autism exists, doesn't it? We can see the symptoms, you can see the symptoms.
Look, autism does exist, but I mean, the word autism is a generic term. Now, and it doesn't mean a lot, to be honest. I mean, because we know the spectrum is so large that someone at one end of the autism spectrum may have a different set of characteristics to someone at the other end of the spectrum. And Kathy alluded to this when we talked about how many people in our community have autistic type personalities who may be somewhere on that spectrum, but that we would never say have a disability. In fact, they have a profound ability through their autistic type personality. And at some point on this spectrum, it becomes a disability. Yes. And that's where the interventions take place. But what we're losing in this debate completely is that it's not all about suffering and a disorder and I mean, I'm sorry, John, I'm not trying to pick the words, and I know you and I are going to disagree on this because we've been at it already down in the front row, but that's what tonight's about. It's about challenging. So if I'm challenging, I'm sorry, but I feel very strongly as a parent of a 20-year-old with autism and someone who actually works with adults with autism on a daily basis. They really are offended by talking about people that suffer this disorder. They don't see that they suffer a disorder. They have a different neurological pattern in their brain.
Indeed. In fact, a lot of the suffering is the parents, isn't it?
The parents, certainly. You know, 20 years of doing what Kathy's done.
Yeah.
I used to say banging on doors first, then banging on tables. You know, that's what you do. It's hard work, but, you know, that's because I didn't understand autism. That's the truth. I wanted for my son my neurotypical future, the view I had for him. I wanted him to have friends. I wanted him to have that normal social experience through the prism of how I saw the world and what was important. As he's become an adult, I've realised that he has a right to having a life that he wants, and that may not be the life that I want for him. Yeah. So that's a long way from the question you asked about, is there autism? Of course there's autism. I think what we are going to find over the next 10 years, 20 years, with the amount of research going on in autism, is that there are many autisms. There's probably 100 subtypes of autism. And at the moment, we're just calling it that because we don't really understand it.
Okay. But, John, you would just call it different sorts of personalities, I suppose.
Well, I mean, I guess the question is whether if we kind of could know everything there is to know, whether we'd still be left with something that we wanted to call autism, or whether we'd be talking about it in completely different terms. So, you know, autism at the moment is a marker for identifying, describing a certain pattern that presents, as is rightly pointed out, both in situations of disadvantage and not. But it's not an explanation.
Oh no, it's not an explanation, it's just a description, a descriptor of a syndrome. Dorothy, in your social working experiences, have you come across autistic children?
A few. Those who have ended up in the statutory child protection system, which is a tragic end for children.
A tragic end for anyone, but
yes,
for an autistic child, that would be especially
where families have been under enormous pressure.
Yes.
And where various routes as to how it might come about, but where children are unable to live at home. Sometimes because the state has assessed the situation to be one of the child being at risk of rejection, abuse and neglect. But in other circumstances, and when we did the Protecting Victoria's Vulnerable Children inquiry in this state, we were very concerned about children with various types of disabilities where parents were so unable to access the support and the resources that they need that they actually needed to go through a child protection system to be able to create an arrangement for their son or daughter not living at home. And that was deeply painful and humiliating to those parents who felt that they had to go through a children's court process or not collect their child from respite care. So I have encountered it in a number of those dimensions in a rather extreme end of the range of our services.
Kathy, when you first got the diagnosis, you must have spent a lot of time looking for what the causes were. You referred to this. Can you tell us what the state of current thinking is as to what the cause is?
Well, I just went to a lecture in London. Have you heard of Simon Baron-Cohen? He's Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin, believe it or not. And he's one of the, in Australia, Tony Attwood is probably one of the leading experts on autism, wouldn't you not say? Absolutely. But in England, it's Simon Baron-Cohen. And he's doing a lot of research, actually, into, first of all, that it is genetic. But he thinks the new thinking is that it's to do with the level of testosterone in the uterus. And because they've been doing studies. Have you read all of this? It's not, doesn't mean it's not, and I said, oh God, you're blaming the mother again. But he said, no, it's not that. It's coming from the fetus, but they think that's the latest thinking they're looking at, that it's actually a hormonal reason. But we know that it is genetic, I mean, because there's so many families where there's 2 or 3 kids with autism in one family. And if you look back in your own family, you can usually see like an eccentric uncle or something in the past. So, and the other thing he's been doing is researching into fields of expertise. The Danish University and Cambridge University are working together, and they've found out how much autism there is in math departments, engineering departments. Silicon Valley is they're nearly all autistic in Silicon Valley. And as Fiona and I were talking before, Silicon Valley, people who are computer nerds, well, of course, they're rich, so they're going to breed. So we could be soon about to breed a whole other super race of some sort. But they don't actually know a lot about it. It's extraordinary that there isn't more research on autism, but they're starting to get more. That's absolutely true. Yeah.
Is there any explanation as to why there's such a predominance of males over females in the condition?
If you'd like, I could talk a little bit about the research, because I'm chairing the National Cooperative Research Centre for Autism in Australia, which is a new centre. We've only been going a few months. We're a collaboration of 50 organisations in Australia, 7 universities, and most of the major autism bodies across the country. And it's a magnificent model for cooperation, because we have end users, people with autism, as part of our participants, as well as the leading minds in Australia. Tony Attwood's one of our participants. And now there's a lot happening in research, and we are getting very close to understanding a lot more about the cause. And Simon Baron-Cohen's work on testosterone, there are a number of followers of that. There's also Eric Corshane's work about brain size, and this is also perhaps the closest one to having the evidence base, which is MRI studies about, I don't know whether I should get into this or not, but redundancy of brain connection, and that seems to be the one that most people are tagging onto. And that there's a genetic basis to this, and we're looking at an overlay of about 70% of families that have what they consider a genetic basis with autism. So there is a very strong genetic component to it that's becoming more and more apparent as the research is coming on. When our son was diagnosed, I said he turns 20 next month, he was diagnosed at 3. So I remember, again, I'm a former academic, so I just assumed that autism, didn't know anything about it, was told, your son has autism. I said, well, what's that? Well, it's something. We don't really know. I said, well, what does it mean? Well, we don't know what causes. This is the best experts. We don't know what causes it. It's lifelong. We have no idea what the treatment is. We have very little evidence to support the educational treatments and interventions that we're giving. We don't think there's a cure, but good luck.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So the way we're going to make these breakthroughs is research. And fortunately, in the last 10 years, we're seeing across the world the fact that of all the disability groupings in the world, the autism grouping is the one that's going through the roof. We still don't know what causes it. We know it's getting larger. We know that diagnosis plays a part in it. We know that that's accounted for in the increase in autism rate, but it doesn't account for the full increase. So suddenly governments are saying the cost of autism in our society as a disability is starting to become enormous. We don't know what to do about it. Let's put some money into research. So the good news of all that is there's a lot of research happening now, and I think in the next 5 years we're going to start to see some really significant understanding.
Did I come across a suggestion that in the United States the percentage of children on the spectrum was 2% now?
In the United States, well, rates vary. One of the interesting things about autism is it is not just Western societies, it's not developed world versus undeveloped world. When we do the research across the world, the rates are going up everywhere. China
is that
has
because
its last
diagnosis is getting better?
So partly, but it's not. A lot of the theories about what causes an environmental cause or whether it's just a trendy diagnosis that people have when they haven't got anything else to have, that gets thrown out the door when you consider when we put the right diagnostics into the Middle East, into China, as a lot of Australian researchers are working in countries in our region, in Indonesia, in Brunei, we are getting the same sort of rates back. Now, the rate at the moment in Australia is about 1 in 88 children born will have an autism diagnosis. In the United States, it's about 1 in 80, and in Denmark, the most recent study, 1 in 66. So when my son was diagnosed, the government official figures were 1 in 10,000.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's not a little increase, it's an enormous increase, and it is not stopping.
In years gone by, the cause was thought to be what was called refrigerator mother syndrome. That it was a denial of warmth or empathy towards the child by the mother that created it. So it was an extra burden for the mother to bear.
Yeah.
With that in mind, and I don't know, John, if you would have any insight into this, would you have any idea what the divorce rate might be amongst parents of autistic children? Any insight at all?
I don't have a figure for you, but I mean, I think that the issue about the refrigerator mother is interesting because it shows how easily we can get causal directions wrong in trying to understand something. That
Yes.
These mothers were not getting the response that they would ordinarily expect from their infant, and were therefore responding in an abnormal way themselves. And that response was what was measured, and the causal direction was 180 degrees wrong.
Yes.
But no, other people would probably be able to comment more about I mean, we know generally in families where there's any sort of extra burden or challenge, then some relationships flourish in that environment and others go under.
Yes.
I think the rates of divorce, depression and unemployment are much higher in families where there is a child with special needs because it's just so exhausting and depleting and
Yes.
stressful a lot of the time. Yeah, it's tragic but true.
John, was just to get back to what you were saying, was tacit to your suggestion that refrigerator mother syndrome was 180 degrees wrong because of the period being uninformed? Are you suggesting that the Baron Cohen position at the moment is just as potentially 180 degrees out?
No, I mean, I'm not familiar with that recent stuff about testosterone, but I mean, he's talked for a long time about the hyper male brain as an explanation for, the milder end of the spectrum, I think.
Yes.
I mean, I think the thing about, over the 30 years or so that I've been a child psychiatrist, I think there have been, 6 or 8 dominant theories of autism come and go. So it pays to be a bit sceptical about whether the most recent one is going to prove to be a satisfactory explanation.
Yes. I suppose it's very hard to set up a clinical trial, isn't it?
Well, no, actually it's not.
No,
That's the truth.
I mean, they've been measuring the testosterone now in the uterus for about 25 years. They've got a lot of data, and it's a scientific theory, not just a random made-up theory that women are cold. I mean, I think they're quite separate categories. But I hasten to add, in France, they still say it's refrigerator mother syndrome.
Well, actually,
Hello, mind you, women didn't get the vote in France till 1949.
Science doesn't make it unscientific. I mean, it was a scientific theory that it was wrong, but it was just as scientific as saying it's testosterone.
I don't think it was scientific. I think it was just medical and social.
Well, because there aren't measurements and statistics doesn't make it unscientific. The fact that it was bad science.
But it's not science.
It wasn't a sciance. It was a hunch, wasn't it?
It was a hunch, yeah. There was no data
It was a hunch.
backing it
Now,
up.
are you suggesting that Baron Cohen's work is a hunch as well?
No.
I know.
No, because there is.
Baron Cohen's work has a obviously he's an eminent scientist, and he can't produce research without it going through the protocols of research. But he comes from a perspective where he is linking it to his work on testosterone and male brain. That's what his expertise is, right? So this is his area of expertise. He's really not saying that I'm going to discover the cause of autism.
Cause of it, no.
He's saying that I can see there's something here happening with, and
a trend.
as tonight, we can be funny about people with autism because it is funny living with someone. I live in a comedy sketch. I mean, my husband's somewhere on the spectrum. My son has autism. My 90-year-old mother lives with me, and I have a son who's neurotypical. So our daily interactions are quite amusing at times. And
why we drink. We drink a lot.
And we laugh a lot because it's easier to cope when you can. And some of Baron Cohen's work is a bit like saying, well, all men are they don't read your lovely story about your father. You don't, maybe some men don't read the signs when you're a bit grumpy with them. The body language thing doesn't work, maybe that's, and it's an extrapolation. Some of that is a bit lighthearted.
Yes.
There is a core to his work that is very serious. And when you asked about why are more men, there is a genetic reason for that, because if it's X-linked, there will be a difference in how it is, the distribution of people in gender.
Okay, but what we can rule out tonight for anyone who might be watching and concerned, it has nothing to do at all with inherently with the behaviour of the mother towards the child. So we can rule that out for a start. We can rule out, there was a theory at one stage that having the child vaccinated might be the cause. There's no evidence for that at all, yes?
No
evidence, no.
No, so that's gone. We can rule out any coming into contact with lead or any other chemical in the house.
I think you've got to be careful about the rule out. Until we know what the cause is, we can't really rule anything out. And what we will find, I am sure, is that there are a lot of people who are diagnosed with autism who maybe, and we're having the DSM-5 is about to come in and it will change the diagnosis this year anyway, but there perhaps will be some things that mimic autism. And I think mercury, there is some evidence in the United States in areas where there is mercury and lead levels that the brain is affected and that it mimics autism. And until we get the diagnosis right, we can't say that that is not a possibility. But in terms of the bulk of the people diagnosed with autism, it is predominantly a genetic factor with a behavioural overlay.
Now, these experiments with mercury, are they experiments on mice?
No, there are experiments on people, actually.
On people?
And in fact, the first of them came from a town called Brick. Now, what do you think they made there? Bricks. So, and there was a mercury, release from the factories and whatever. So there is some evidence to say that, and so you can't say everyone is nonsense.
No.
Now, in terms of
but
what we're
mercury
talking
and madness
about,
we've known for a long. Mad's a hatter. I mean, that's been known for a long time.
Yeah. So exactly. So you can't just say no. That's all.
But there was never a suggestion that hatters tended to be autistic.
Mad hatters.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't have a term for autism then.
Ah, well, that could be true too.
Yes.
So until we know, I think we can, and it's the same with treatments. We have parents, mortgaging their homes to go and take their children swim with dolphins in Los Angeles. We have parents paying $2,000 a shot to put them in hyperbaric chambers. This is what's so wrong about what we're doing with autism. That unless we can give an evidence base to the treatment, families are just going to the ends of the earth, and it's what destroys families.
Yes, then people are desperate.
That's why the research is important.
That's why the research is important. Can we just talk about for a moment coping mechanisms that family shoes. Kathy mentioned, having a drink on occasion. Can I say, just by way of observation, friends that I have noticed who do have autistic children, what's been common is that the father has gone missing and the mother has developed a drinking problem. Now, is this common?
Yeah. Well, did you read the Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time? Did that come here? Well, that book, Mark Haddon, I can tell you, he stole that story from a friend of mine who has an autistic child. They went on a writer's retreat, and she was telling him about her son, and suddenly he wrote this book about it. But the thing I didn't like about the book, and I did like the book, but the one thing that didn't strike a chord with me was that the mother went missing. Yes. Because in my experience, there are some fabulous dads who give their life blood to their children, but in my experience, often the fathers disappear and is the mother who's left. Mothers just don't leave. And that didn't ring true on that book. And then, of course, it's just so isolating, which is why when I was writing The Boy Who Fell to Earth, I made the mother a single mother just to emphasise that is usually the case. I'm sure you found that out too.
And it's not always the mother, though. And I think it's sometimes fathers. I've met some amazing dads where the mother hasn't played the role. So it's not
exception to the rule. Could I
suggest? That's
suggest?
the exception. But your question about how do you cope? Well, it's the same as any stressful situation. People will do different things, and there's no doubt that in an autism household, when your child is, particularly before your child has the diagnosis. So your child's born and doing all these things, and you can't take them anywhere because of the, they're not acting like everyone else's child. They may have.
Well, you can't take them to someone else's house.
Exactly, and your family are saying, oh, can't you, you're a terrible parent, basically. They might not say it, but you know that everyone's thinking you're a terrible... And then you finally know there's something. And I think sometimes those first few years before the diagnosis can be as hard as, or harder than after the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Once you know what you're dealing with, I think you've got to get through that anger, denial, grief thing as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
Because they're all destructive things. Now, I can say that in hindsight, it takes a long time to get through it. But the sooner you get to acceptance, and the sooner you start to access treatment, you see your child, as every child with autism will improve with treatment. I mean, that's the joy of autism, is that you see these beautiful young people who, to society, have been all out of control. Suddenly, you know how to deal with it, and they really start to find themselves. And this particularly happens when your child becomes an adult, and we talk so much about children. People with autism are adults for far longer than they are children. And so much of the debate is about children. And yet I meet adults who are really comfortable in their own skin. They've had horrendous childhoods. They've all been bullied at school. They've lived through that stressful family situation and somehow had the courage to come out the other end and really be comfortable being autistic.
Yeah. And we should give hope.
That's acceptance.
Yeah, and I think we should give hope to any parents there who have younger children. It does get better.
Absolutely.
I mean, my son's now 22. He's got a girlfriend. Hello, a girlfriend. He's living independently 4 nights a week in a flat with support. He comes home to me a few nights a week. He started a course at college with support, with help. I put trainer wheels on him. But, he's gradually getting out into the world. So don't give up hope. It does get better. With maturity, they do start to gel a little bit more. So, it's not all doom and gloom. Yeah.
Dorothy, have you noticed coping mechanisms?
Well, what I was going to say was that this is not different from other areas of children's disability, where the way we've delivered services has traditionally not reached out to fathers. So I think we need to look at the way the services that are often focused around mothers taking children to appointment, mothers seeing clinicians, mothers seeing maternal and child health nurses, the general practitioner. And it's only fairly recently that those services have been encouraged to be father inclusive, to ask about how a father may understand what is happening for their son or daughter, to actually reach out and engage with them, bring them in or visit the home. So I think that I don't want to beat up on dads, because I'm not sure if our services have really served fathers well in these very difficult times where you might have a mother and a father at a different pace coming to terms with what is happening for their child and having a very different perspective on that, and often then minimising the other's concern, and I think we really need to honour the couple relationship during this very difficult time for families.
Yes.
And for siblings.
Yeah.
We've only very recently begun to talk about what the experience may be for other children in families where a
Yes.
child has a special need.
Yes.
And
So
can
I
I
think-
can I take the opportunity to put in a plug for an organisation called Siblings Australia, which does, I think the only organisation around that does directly look at the needs of brothers and sisters of all kinds of children with disabilities, but autism is a particular focus that they have.
Yeah, what are the implications for siblings, John? Are there any?
Well, I mean, I think that there are a wide range from, on the one hand, needing to achieve to kind of somehow be a comfort to the parents and make up for things that their disabled sibling isn't able to do. A huge caring role that they sometimes have to adopt. And siblings do get some support when they're carers, but the responsibilities and demands on a sibling are much greater than just being a carer, because there are all the emotional connections to having a disabled brother and sister. And the other thing is abuse of children. That children are sometimes quite badly harmed by dysregulated siblings who, and families aren't always able to protect smaller or sometimes even larger siblings from attacks. So, I mean, none of these things are necessarily directly attributable to autism, but they happen in the context of.
Yeah.
So I think that, one thing I think is really important is that, everybody recognises the demands that are placed on families where a child has got special needs, and as a result, sometimes the children without special needs miss out. And I think we've got to be mindful of that.
But some of the research I read on this too, just to give hope to the parents out there, is that the siblings of a child with special needs often grow up to be the most well-adjusted, compassionate, self-sufficient people, because they haven't had all the focus and the parents on them the whole time, and they've had to learn to stand on their own 2 feet. And the research I read said that actually quite often they develop into the most wonderful adults. So it's not, don't despair.
How's your daughter coped with it?
Well, it struck a chord with me when you said that
Yeah.
about the achieving thing, because she's totally academic. She's at university second year. She just got 4 firsts. She's going to be Prime Minister. She's definitely got that achieving thing. But she's also incredibly compassionate and very self-sufficient, and but quite dismissive of him, whereas I can get very upset and emotional about things that happened to him, as I'm sorry I got upset earlier. She just treats him like a brother, and I think that's good for him. So, yeah, so far she's okay.
What about?
yeah.
Sorry, was there a question here? Look, feel free to just interrupt if you wish. If there's something germane you want to add.
Hi, thank you. I just actually wanted to hear a little bit more about Sibling Australia, please. I have 3 sons, a neurotypical in an Asperger's sandwich, with an older and a younger brother. If I could hear a little bit more about what they actually do, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Not as much as they'd like to, because it's very difficult for them to attract funding.
They have a very good website, Siblings Australia, and a blog. Kate Strom is the coordinator. In South Australia, that's where you would. But they're always on the verge of closing. That's the sadness about Siblings Australia. They rely on people like us to write letters and say, we need more money for sibling support. And they've been around for now 15 years, started by a sibling, and they do incredible work. They're the only one in Australia doing it, but they fly by the smell of an oily rag.
Kate's written a book called Siblings, so you might want to get hold of that.
Just as you're moving towards this other questioner here, is this related to Siblings Australia, this question?
Hi, my name's Lindell Kennedy. Sorry, I'm from Aspergus Victoria, and we're just starting a siblings group. We're having our first meeting on the 11th of October for siblings aged 8 to 12 with a sibling with Asperger's.
Oh, great. Excellent.
Okay.
So if you just go to Asperger's Victoria website, you can find out details about that.
Okay. Thanks for that. Dorothy, if I could just ask you, and you may not be able to help me here at all, but with the National Disability Insurance Scheme, in the way it is being designed or trialled, is autism or children on the autism spectrum, are they included in the general sense of disability that the scheme covers?
Well, others will probably be able to say more because they'll have been involved in the consultations. But disability care, or the National Disability Insurance Scheme as it was called before, is a scheme for people, children and adults, with significant disability. And so the devil will be in the detail in terms of how that is assessed. And there will be adults and children who will, I think, be deemed not to be sufficiently impaired in their functioning to be eligible for assistance. So there will be a lot of controversy in the grey zone, but perhaps others have already been involved in these discussions and negotiations.
Yes, the difficulty, or part of the difficulty here is that often from a distance, an autistic child looks absolutely fine. Doesn't appear to be a problem at all.
This is a really burning issue for the autism community at the moment. We're such a large community that we have always felt that when we put together a national scheme, if you put autism in, it's going to cost a lot more, and if you keep autism out, it might be manageable. And there's been a lot of negotiation with the government over the last many years, 5 years. But what we have now are the pilot schemes, and this is where we're looking at what the criteria will be for people with autism. Now, there is nothing, it's not that people with autism are in or out, it's a needs-based system, not a diagnostic system. So the fact that you have autism as your diagnosis won't automatically put you in or out, not like care allowance or the care support where it's a diagnostic-based system. This is a needs-based system, so it will be individual assessments similar to the disability support pension and that type of template used. So they are still working through the detail within the pilot system. Again, the only way people with autism's needs will be met is if there is a community saying, you don't understand our needs, we might not look like we need those needs, but we need to start lobbying our members of parliament on that very issue. Now is the time.
Indeed. Look, I think we've got Rashada, do you have a tweet there for us? Yes?
What does the panel think of DSM's decision to incorporate Asperger's into autistic spectrum disorder in its latest edition?
So say that again?
So what does the panel think of DSM's decision to incorporate Asperger's into ASD in its latest edition?
No.
No idea.
So,
I'm baffled by
no,
that.
This is DSM-5. This is the new system of classification for autism.
DSM-5.
So mental health works on a DSM system. We're moving from DSM-4 to DSM-5 this year. We've just moved to
DSM-5 better, do we think?
Well, DSM-5 doesn't use the term Asperger's syndrome.
It doesn't use the term?
Okay, so DSM-5 uses the term autism spectrum disorder for everything.
Yeah, because in America, the American Psychiatric
Society
don't use the word Asperger's anymore because they said people were using it too lightly. We say, oh, my boyfriend's a little bit Aspie, and when it is a serious condition, when your child really has autism, to make light of it. That's their thinking. But just we've made Asperger's kind of known. It seems a shame that we can...
So Asperger's is yesterday's model?
In America, we're not so sure.
So now it's autism spectrum?
In terms of
Autism
a diagnosis,
spectrum.
it's yesterday's model. But what has happened is people with Asperger's have said, look, we're really comfortable with this term.
Yeah.
We really like it. We feel that it's... I mean, there is a horrible thing about that word autism. It's a sharp, harsh... And I remember, when my son was diagnosed, thinking, I wish it had another name.
Yeah.
It's a funny word. It's
like
about
a
self.
submarine patch
so
closing.
we developed this Asperger syndrome because it seemed more palatable to people. But in fact, it blurred the lines between what is called, again, a dreadful thing, high-functioning autism versus low-functioning autism. So there are conferences every day all around the world about is Asperger syndrome high-functioning autism or something else? And they could never resolve it. So in the end, we have a spectrum now where there is degrees, and as I said earlier, we need 100 autisms. We don't just need Asperger's, high functioning, low functioning, because the terms are fairly meaningless.
And don't forget Hans Asperger, who came up with the term Asperger's. He says that autism is just an extreme form of maleness, and that all men are somewhere on the spectrum. So.
We're back in John's position. It doesn't exist at all.
We also need to stand up to the cultural imperialism that is in DSM-5 or the whole DSM enterprise, which is a money-making exercise by the American Psychiatric Association. And we don't have to buy DSM. There are other classification systems that we can use.
Right.
It's not very catchy, is it, DSM?
DSM.
I mean, it sounds like something you put in your car.
No, well, I've gone right off them. I only found out about them 2 minutes ago. But I think they're rubbish. Yeah, there's another question up there. Yes.
Okay, so my question is panel. Where are the people on the panel who actually are autistic? Because recently being at the APAC conference, where I heard a statement which really rebounds with me now tonight, and that was no conversation about us without us. So I'd like to hear from Judy Brewer and from Kathy about that, about my statement.
Well, that's a very, very good point. But, I mean, okay, for an example though, I don't know many autistic people I know who would want to get up and be sociable. And in fact, when I called this talk, the talk I gave tonight, I called it Asparagus syndrome because that's what my son calls his condition. Fiona was telling me that they got messages from autistic people saying, how dare they call this talk that we are not vegetables? And I thought, oh, what an autistic thing to say. You know, it's a joke. So I agree, maybe we should have tried harder to find someone who does want to come up and stand. The only person I've met who talks very, with such fascination and insight about autism is Temple Grandin. Have you ever met, do you know who I mean by Temple Grandin? They made a film about it, Claire Danes played her, etc. And it's wonderful to hear her talk. We've spoken together sometimes to get an idea of what autism's like I talk about it from the outside in, but she talks about it from the inside out, and it's fascinating. But she's the only person I've met who's ever with autism who has wanted to get up and talk to you, because the others would just think, no, they would feel too ill at ease, in my experience. But
Kathy, I'm sorry.
am I wrong?
I have to say I disagree with you with this one.
Oh, okay, okay.
I know just so many people with autism who want to be up here.
Oh, really?
And
well,
they
that's
want
great.
to be asked,
Yeah.
but they're not asked.
Right.
And that's why we don't know them, because they're in fact, one of our leadership future leaders is in the audience tonight, has just been on a training program, 24 adults with autism, 20 to 30-year-old training in how do you do the things that we need to get their voice heard. How do you speak at a conference? How do you speak at a meeting? And the next stage of this is how do we get people with autism on the boards of the organisations making the decisions about their future?
Yeah.
Because there should be nothing about us without us.
It's
and
a great question.
It is an excellent question.
Great question.
I think we hide behind this thing about it's too hard. It's actually not too hard. It just means we need to stop thinking that the neurotypical way is the only way. And technology allows us to beam in questions, to text in questions. We could, if we had promoted this perhaps, and this is the sort of forum that could be in the homes of people who are socially isolated but still contributing questions, comments. There are many ways we can do this, and this is the new frontier for us. And I think for me, it was the aha moment when I started taking my son to conferences and thinking, why are they all talking about him as though he's not here? He can't speak for himself, perhaps, stand up on the stage, and he doesn't have his mother's unbearable gift of, or not gift as my family think, of talking non-stop. So he would find it very hard to stand at the microphone and talk, but he wouldn't find it hard to sit there and text. Okay. And so we have to find ways to
good point.
to
Really good point.
They have the lived experience. You know, we're the adjunct in the autism world. We're the parents. We're pretty close to it. We live it 24 hours a day, but we're not autistic. No. They have the lived experience.
I did hear a fantastic guy on BBC4 in London who has autism. He's a scientist. And he was saying, well, you people think we're weird the way we don't make eye contact and the way we don't make small talk. He said, we think you're weird. He said, the amount of time you spend being nice to people you don't even like. And he said, if it weren't for people like me, human beings would never have got out of the cave. And I thought, he's absolutely right. So, yeah.
But we have to ask. Yeah. And that's what we don't do. We
Thank
don't
you for
ask.
bringing that up. That was a
question.
really good point. Yeah.
Yes.
As I pass the microphone over to Chris, I just wanted to say the actual quote of the Temple Grandin quote that I really like, What would happen if the autistic gene was taken out of the gene pool? You'd have a bunch of people standing around chatting and socialising in a cave and not getting anything done.
Thanks very much, Penny. I've really liked what you've mentioned there, Judy. There's a couple of us here who are working to build a youth network for young people on the spectrum that's focused on mentoring for employment and mentoring for enterprising and mentoring for that social inclusion to work on the broader social change agenda. Because I agree with you, like there's so much talk about children and young people on the spectrum, not much talk by them. And we've got communities that are putting I can't in their mouth, and we're trying to put I can in their mouth. So we're calling ourselves the I Can Network. But one of the things we will need in a long-term way is we're going to need people both within the autism community, in the wider disability sector, and in Australia at large who can help us open doors and change the game on this. And I wondered if you could help us, give us some advice on how to do that high-level work, both within government and community organisations, and what you'd be prepared to do.
Well, look, you seem to be talking too much as well. I think now is the time. Like, things are changing, and part of it goes back to the disability care. Disability care is a different paradigm about service delivery. It's trying to empower people to make choices about their own future. It takes a lot of the decision-making, puts it back in the hands of the people who are getting the services. And to do that, we need to help train people in how they're going to make those choices and how they're going to liaise with the service providers or whatever. So the governments are looking for programs that fit to that disability care model and also fit to the basic human rights that we all believe in, I'm sure, is that people should have a say in their futures and their own futures, and we should find ways that they can do it. So I think we are moving very quickly towards programs such as what you're talking about. And the best evidence I have of that is that recent Asia-Pacific Autism Conference that was mentioned, which was August in South Australia, and it was 1,200 delegates, where normally we would have perhaps 1% of people with autism at that conference. We had 180 of the 1,200 delegates. So there was a whole lot of provisions made for people with autism to be part of that. We had 50% of the keynote speakers were adults with autism. John Elder Robinson from America, another fantastic author and speaker. Stephen Shaw, an advocate, and President Obama's advisor on autism, Ari Neiman. They were the three keynotes we brought from America for that conference to inspire people. And what we found was, there was a quiet room, there was texting of questions, there was a whole lot of facilities provided to make it an autism friendly. In fact, the theme was true colours: be bold, be brave, be brilliant. You know, this is what it's about. Be bold, be brave, be brilliant.
That's wonderful.
So it's moving, it's changing, and I think we've been a bit slow to keep up. And forums like this are where we need to always have in our head any discussion about autism needs to have people with autism in the discussion. So I think, how do you do it? Well, clearly you need to put together a proposal and you need to do the lobbying. We funded this program of Future Leaders through philanthropic funding. And again, in Melbourne, we have some of the best philanthropic funding in the country, probably the best philanthropic funding. The Jack Brockhoff Foundation, who are sponsoring today, Ian Potter Foundation, who sponsored our program. You have some fantastic foundations. There's not a lot of money in the autism community because most people are just incredibly stretched. And as you say, people with autism generally don't have a job. So they're living on disability support. They can't afford to be going to conferences. So we need to find that funding. But come up with a good proposal, and I think you'll find some open doors, because this is the time to do it. And I'm very happy to help with that.
There was a question. Up. Yes, sorry, yes.
Hello, my name's Jackie, and I'm with Asperger's Victoria as well. I've just started a Parents of Teenagers support group. I'm here with my son, who's on the spectrum, and have his authority to ask this question of you. He's started high school, and you mentioned schooling, Kathy, and there are so many difficulties in schooling. And I'm particularly concerned about a human rights issue, which is how discipline is handled in high school. So children on the spectrum can have emotional meltdowns and act, in very extreme sorts of ways. And then if they're disciplined in the sort of standard way, it tends to be discriminatory because that for obvious reasons you can't treat them in the same way. And I'm trying to speak to my own son's school about that, and I think many parents are trying to speak to their schools about that and not having any success at all. I'm just wondering what any of you might have to suggest.
Well, this does, this is a really interesting issue now, isn't it? What is the general advice here? Is it an advantage to have autistic children enter mainstream schooling as early as possible, in a delayed way, when readiness is reached? When does that point come when they are ready for mainstream schooling? Because I know with a lot of organisations the idea is to fast track a child into mainstream ASAP. Now, I don't know. Anyone?
Happy to.
Yes. Add something.
Sorry, I just need to add to that for children with Asperger's in Australia, they belong in mainstream schooling. They're very intelligent. They certainly don't belong in special education. That would be imprisonment. But there are difficulties because, they have all of these social problems and behaviour management problems, as well as being very intelligent. It's difficult enough for bright kids in our schooling system without having those. So we've found the right school. I'm very happy with the school. However, I'm just anticipating these human rights issues. That's essentially what they are, issues of discrimination.
I think one of the things that we should address is explaining autism to other people, other kids in the school, so that they understand why our kids are acting in a certain way. And I've certainly done that for my own son. When he was in an acting course, in Camden, and he said one day, it was very tough kids from the estate, and he just said to them one day, "I don't like poor people." He said, poor people are not my milieu, and anyway, they rang me and said, would I come over? Because they were these kids were about to kill him for saying this. So I thought they thought I was going to arrive in a Rolls Royce in pearls, and I cycled over and I went in and, these were really tough kids who'd been in care and everything, and Jules was just, and he was just frightened by what they'd been talking about. So I then gave a talk to them about Asperger's, explained what it was, and once they understood, it took all the sting out of it, and then they were quite intrigued and they were much more accepting. It's all about giving people information so they're not so judgmental. That's what I think is the key, talking in schools and explaining this condition, because people don't know enough about it, I think, but you've probably got other ideas.
Well, Dorothy, can I ask you to...
Well, I'd like to go beyond the increasing awareness and think about the school and the classroom as a little world. I do some voluntary work in a classroom once a week, and in that classroom of children aged 9 and 10, there would be 6 children out of 24. There's one child, well, I don't want to say too much, but there'd be fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. There'd be 2 children who've been in out-of-home care. There are some children who've been given a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder. Whatever the label, their behaviour is extraordinarily challenging. So I think we have to also take the position of the teacher in the classroom and think about the supports that are required in the current way we structure our schools and our classes, and have an understanding of what support they need if they're going to create a compassionate, cooperative culture in their little microcosm of the classroom and, of course, in the school as a whole. So I think it is more than educating people in different sorts of conditions and disabilities.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Yeah.
This gentleman here, yes. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Russ. I'm the parent of an autistic boy who's actually here with me at the moment, Liam.
Hi.
I just wanted to make a point through the whole discussion, and for people that I'm not sure how many in the room that haven't had exposure or experiences with autistic behaviour or people. But the thing that's glowing to me in all this discussion, it is a spectrum disorder, and there's sort of categories of conversation or pinpointing behaviours here, and it's far more broad than that, you know, and I'm not sure that there's anybody that's not. I mean, where's it start and where's it finish? But in this discussion, when people are talking about mainstream school, Liam goes to mainstream school. We've been lucky enough to be able to do that for him. He's an extremely affectionate man, quite sensitive. He's suffered with bullying, but he's got a great network of friends too that he's been at school with since he was little. But through all that time that 17 wonderful years, and we've always focused on what he can do, not what he can't do. Yeah. You know, the spectrum is so broad, and some of the behaviours I see of kids at the school that are potentially or supposed to be normal, they're far more challenged than he is. He was bullied by a boy whose mother was the Minister for Mental Health, you know. So, you know, when you're talking about it and you're pinpointing certain behaviours or levels of it, it's very difficult for anyone outside of the family to understand how broad and how... I'm not sure where I'm heading with this, but it is a very, very mixed bag.
Yes. Yeah. Look, we're getting close to having to wind up here. Could I just finally put it both to you, Kathy, and Judy as well? There's much greater now optimism and hope, isn't there, in the world for people with autism than there has been in the past. That's fair to say.
Yeah. I think part of that is that it is losing its stigma.
Yes.
Through books like The Rosie Project and The Curious Incident of Dog in the Night Time, and even, what was that film that came out last year about the guy who was bipolar? You know. Anyway, she won the Oscar for it. What was it, guys? What was it called? Silver Lining Playbook. Anything like that helps people actually accept that people are different.
Yes.
Is helping, and then that's new. I mean, that's new in the last 5 years anyway that I think. So I think that people are more open-minded about that it's okay to be a little bit different. So I think, yeah, optimism is not an eye disease, okay? I hate these sessions where people go away thinking, oh no, it's all terrible. No, there is a lot to be hopeful about, I think, in our world.
Yeah. And just finally, Judy, if I could put it to you, in the past, parents who are reasonably wealthy have been able to source special schooling for their children. For those who are economically challenged now, are there opportunities there for them?
John, I don't know if it's as much about wealth. It is partly, of course, if you can buy private services, you're certainly going to be able to get more intensive services, but it's also geographic. And certainly with education, a lot of our families find that they have to move to access services because there's different, and this group at the back about education, I think that's certainly my son's education was the hardest years of my life. It was horrendous. And I had a mother today ring me about her son in year 12. And I had to say to her, look, I don't have any answers because unfortunately we did everything we possibly could. We school jumped, we talked to the classes, we withdrew him, we homeschooled, we went through the whole spectrum, private school, state school, special school. Yes. And nothing worked for him. Yes. And in the end, I decided I wanted a happy, unconditionally loved son who I adore, who is the cleverest boy, who makes my life such a joy, because I wouldn't be sitting here if my life hadn't gone down this path. So I thank him for what he's added to my life. And he's a beautiful boy, and I wanted him happy, not put through the ringer. And that's what schools are doing. And I don't think there's a magical model. The partial integration, where there's the option of taking children out for certain subjects, integrating where they can, that seems to be the best we've got. Yes. So in terms of whether you can buy those services, no. The answer to me keeps coming back to was two things. One is understanding autism. The more we understand what's going on and getting that diagnosis right, the great saying that if you've met one person with autism, well, then you've met one person with autism, because every single person with autism is different. And there's no generalising of what works for one. There's certain characteristics that fit the spectrum, but the needs will be individualised. So how a school system is going to cope with every child requiring an individual plan, that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
And people say to me all the time, well, even people without autism require an individual plan. It's not the same as having a child who's acutely anxious about school, who's being bullied, who's having to be withdrawn. So schooling is the minefield. We're not doing it very well. It doesn't matter how much money you've got, we're not doing it very well. And that's the sad thing. But the joy is when you see the blossoming of our young people with autism and that optimism. I said this beautiful future leaders group that I've been working with are the most inspiring group of people I've ever met in my life. And I don't say that in a patronising way. They've got the answers. And they've made me question so many things in my life that are so pathetically superficial and ridiculous.
Sure.
And shown me what really matters. So we can all learn from that as the village. Yeah.
Well, look, I think that's... Oh, okay, very quickly, yes.
No pressure.
Now I feel really bad that everyone's...
No, don't feel bad.
I have two sons, one with high functioning and autism and one's an Aspie. So I have a full spectrum at home, I guess you'd say. But my question is really, to mums of the Aspies, really. What do you tell your son or daughter when they come to you and say, Mum, why am I different? What's wrong with me? Because that's where I'm at the moment, and I can't wait to bring... He would love this. He would sit here happily, and he'd have plenty to say. Don't worry, he'd have plenty to say. But what do I tell him? What do I look him in the eye? You talk about not diagnosing, having no labels. Oh, it's not autism isn't real. I've been told that by 2 paediatricians, and I've been to about 12 paediatricians, so I fund them as well. But what do you tell them? What do you look them in the eye when they're 7 years old looking at you going, Mummy, why am I different?
Yeah. Well, I think information is power, and I've always been completely upfront with Jules and told him, that every time I got another diagnosis, dyspraxia or whatever, I would explain it to him. The only reason you have labels, and you're looking at me sceptical because you've got skepticemia, the only point of labels is it points you in the right direction to get help. And it's also a shorthand. So you can say to someone, well, my son's got on the autistic spectrum. They cut you a little bit more slack. That's the only point of labels. But I've always told him, the same as sex education for kids, you give them the information so that they're not labouring under some kind of illusion. And as I said when I was talking earlier, concentrate on his good points. It's a boy, what you said, yeah? Just keep saying to him why he's unusual, why he's different, why he's unique, why he's interesting. Because all the time they're told they're wrong and stupid and doing everything the wrong way at school. You have to balance that at home and just build up their self-esteem as much as you possibly can. That's how I do it, but I don't know how you do it.
Very similar, and Kathy, I agree. Our son was 8 when I told him. We thought about it. We got a lot of advice. How do we go through this? He was really in a bad way because he was, things were not going very well. And we took the advice, which worked very well for us. I don't know whether it works for everyone. And basically said to him, everyone in this world has labels. I'm neurotypical, NT, you've got autism, ASD. They're equal but different. Yeah. And that's how it works. And through life, everyone will have other labels or whatever. Labels are fine, they just mean that's the way your brain thinks. There's lots of great things about having autism. That's why you know every plane that has ever flown in the sky. That's why you're very good at maths. But neurotypicals tend to be good at writing and English and talking. So we all have different strengths and weaknesses. They're yours. We'll work on the other ones. I've got to work on shutting up. And we all work on whatever our gifts are. Everyone has gifts. And for us, that worked. And he was about 8, and he's very proud of being autistic. He's like, people with autism rock, and they do. And the older he gets, you know, he loves other people with autism too, because he really identifies with them. Not that he's got anything in common. So it's all about how you do it, and that's why words like disorder, wrong, suffering, all those words, they grate on me now, because that's who they are. It's not something we're going to bang out of them. That's who they intrinsically are, and we've got to celebrate that.
And you know what, there was a piece in the Sunday Times a few months ago that said that in Silicon Valley, it's such a sign of brilliance if you've got Asperger's or autism, that parents are trying to get their paediatricians to put it on their form, so it means that they might give them an advantage when they're going for a job. I'm like, oh my God.
So again, using those things, getting the people that who have made the people we mentioned before, so many people in science who have made change, so many well-known people think differently. The richest man in the world, Bill Gates, says he's probably, or he has said he's probably autistic.
He rocks like that in meetings. What about Steve Jobs?
Mark Zuckerberg, all the great IT gurus. Who wouldn't want to be like him?
This is a point at which, on this very optimistic, uplifting note, and just personally speaking, I can say that my experience of autism goes right back to the Dark Ages, where families, the blinds came down on their homes, they saw no one and no one saw them.
Yeah.
So to see this transition that's happened in the last 50 years, to me, is phenomenal. It's been wonderful today. Could you please thank our panellists? Just finally, two things. I would encourage anyone to read The Boy Who Fell to Earth, Kathy's extraordinary novel. Honestly, the observations are unerringly accurate. They certainly really ring true. Oh, and they're on sale.
I'm
sorry.
going to sign, yes, I'm going out there.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And the other thing is I should acknowledge Vic Health, the Club Melbourne Ambassador Program, and the City of Melbourne, and each of you who came along this evening. Thank you very much, and good night.